Okay, we are about to start with the third and final session of our event today, which is entitled Exploring the Nexus of Regional and Global Integration, a Perspective from Policymakers. So we have a really interesting panel, and I would like to ask Sinyon Park.
Okay, thanks, Orlando. Well, so we saved the best for the last. I hope no one goes to sleep after a nice meal. As Rolando introduced, my name is Sin-Young Park. I'm from the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department. I'm actually still managing the Regional Cooperation, Integration, and Trade work within ADB. So this session will further discuss around globalization and then fragmentation topics. We have invited a group of outstanding policymakers and experts around the region and who will exchange insights on the relationship between regional and global integration policies in light of increasing economic fragmentation. Our panelists will share their experience on the risks and opportunities posed by the increasing geo-economic fragmentation. They will also share some of the policy insights to navigate this uncertain global environment. Let me introduce our distinguished panelists. First, Mr. Lee Chin-tong, who is the Deputy Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry. He is currently the Member of Parliament for Askanta Puteri and the State Assembly person for Perling, Johor. He was a senator in Dewan Negara and served as Deputy Defense Minister from July 2018 to February 2020. He supported Minister Muhammad Sabu's effort to present Malaysia's first ever defense white paper, which was passed in Parliament on December 2019. He was first elected member of the Parliament for Bukit Bendera and was subsequently the Member of Parliament for Kelung. Deputy Minister Chin-tong graduated with a degree in political science and an honors degree in Asian studies from Australian National University and holds an international master's in regional integration from the Asia-Europe Institute, University of Malaysia. Let's please welcome Mr. Lee Chin-tong. And now we have Ms. Lynn Aquia, who is the Director of Bureau of International Trade Relations, Department of Trade and Industry of the Philippines. She has worked on WTO, APEC, ASEAN, UNCTAD, and GSP issues since 1996. She helped to coordinate the formulation of national positions for the Philippines' external trade strategy. She previously served as a chairperson of the APEC Committee on Trade Investment and is currently Philippines Deputy Senior Official to APEC and Philippines Senior Economic Official to the ASEAN. Director Lin has an MBA from Boston University and a BA in Communication Research from the University of Philippine Diliman and master's credit in Sociology from the Ateneo de Manila University. Please welcome Lin. And our next panelist is Ms. Yogi Rahmayanti, who is the director of the Center for Regional and Bilateral Policy in Indonesia's Ministry of Finance. Ms. Yogi has a strong interest in the subject of public sector efficiency and international finance. She has been serving in the Indonesian Ministry of Finance since 1997 and has various roles, primarily in budgeting, treasury, and public financial the management. She holds a doctorate in public policy from Osaka University and a Master of Public Policy from Hitotsubayashi University. Please welcome Ms. Yogi. And our next panelist will join virtually, who is Carlos Criyama, and the Director of the Policy Support Unit at the APEC Secretariat. He has experience working mainly on topics concerning trade and investment, liberalization, and regulatory and structural reforms. Previously, Carlos was a government official in Peru's Ministry of Foreign Trade and Tourism, where he led the design of Peru's trade negotiations agenda and implemented Peru's trade strategy with Asia and Oceania economies. Carlos was associate researcher and lecturer in economics at Universidad del Pacifico in Lima, Peru, where he wrote extensively and participated in several research projects on trade, investment, and integration issues. He holds a Master's of International Affairs from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in economics from the Universidad del Pacifico in Lima, Peru. Please welcome Mr. Carlos. And our last panelist, Ms. Anita Prakash. She's the Director for Partnership in the Office of President of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area, based in Jakarta, Indonesia. Her policy research supports the summits and the ministerial processes in ASEAN in East Asia and Europe, notably the Trade Ministers meeting in ASEAN, the East Asia Summit, and Asia-Europe meeting, the Trade and Agriculture working groups in G20 and trade ministers in the G7. Her research covers trade and international relations, while her current research work is emerging economic architecture with the reliable and resilient supply chains in the Indo-Pacific. She's a proud alumni of Delhi University and Australian National University. Let's welcome Ms. Anita. So, first, I will direct some questions to each of our panelists, and then we'll try to have like 2 or 3 rounds of these questions. So first, to Mr. Lin Chin Tong. Malaysia is one of the largest exporter of semiconductors in the world. Now, these current geoeconomic tensions are really rising around the semiconductor industry. What is the government agenda in Malaysia for ensuring the resilience in the supply chain in this sector? What are kind of like opportunities and challenges of this geoeconomic fragmentation for Malaysia's semiconductor industry?
Thank you, Sin Yong. As far as the semiconductor industry is concerned, I think this is an opportunity for Malaysia. In fact, I can show off a bit of my new book. I call this a potential second take-off. I said that there is a potential second take-off for Malaysia. And the first take-off happened, as far as Malaysia is concerned, happened between 1988 and 1997. Why that happened? Because in 1985, the United States forced Japan to appreciate the yen and yen taka Plaza Accord. And because of that, there were Japanese firms and their suppliers from South Korea and Taiwan relocating to Southeast Asia, and Malaysia benefited from that wave. We are now seeing similar patterns that happens to the semiconductor industry. So as far as semiconductor industry is concerned, I think we are benefiting from that relocation of a global supply chain. But of course, we are also very conscious of the potential fallout of a potential bifurcated supply chain, especially as far as semiconductor is concerned. It is, well, some people call this the new oil, and oil has two aspects. Oil has the aspect, the prosperity part of it, but it also has the conflict part of it. So we're dealing with the potential prosperity that comes from semiconductor, but also potential conflict out of it. Malaysia occupies about 7% or contributes about 7% of global semiconductor trade, about 22% of US semiconductor trade, and about 13% of back-end semiconductor trade. We aspire, hopefully, over the next decade or so, as the Prime Minister just launched the National Semiconductor Strategy. We're hoping that over the next decade or so, we can move from the back end, which is mainly outsourced assembly and testing, to the front end. We would like to see a lot more IC design. We would like to see a lot more advanced packaging, and hopefully fabs. And not forgetting that we are already occupied a small part of global equipment supply, that we have indigenous companies that are doing reasonably well in the equipment side. So these are the areas that we hope we can actually do well. But when it comes to semiconductor, it also brings to another questions. How do we see regionalization? Do we see ourselves as a competitor to Vietnam or to other countries? I would like to see that within Southeast Asia, I would like to see that Southeast Asia eventually can evolve into a supply chain to a certain extent. And I always share with friends that I say, as long as Malaysia can move up the ladder so that Malaysia doesn't have to see itself competing with Vietnam, but it is occupying a slightly higher level and continue to push for technology acquisition. What the challenge in the first round, the first takeoff in the 80s and the 90s, was that there were a lot of FDI coming in, but there wasn't enough localization. There wasn't enough benefits to the workers, benefits to the local companies, and we would like to do this well and do it better this time.
Thank you, Mr. Tong. I remember in one of your blog, you actually discussed about creating this regional supply chain and really create like an environment to raise to the top. I did actually advocate that also in ADB. And then Malaysia is presenting a good example. I'm very happy to connect that to now Philippines. Ms. Lin, so how does the Philippine government empower businesses and the private sector to participate in the supply chain with the open trade and investment? What kind of policies do we need to help businesses maximize these potential benefits?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Sinyan, for that question. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Asian Development Bank for inviting the Philippines Department of Trade and Industry to participate in this very important discussion. As to your question, I think it's important to consider both the challenges and the opportunities or the benefits of open trade and investment, and also free trade agreements. So within this, this is how the government, how the Philippines would respond along this consideration. So our programs make sure that businesses, exporters and importers are aware of both the benefits and the challenges. So some of the strategies we have taken to continue to empower our businesses would be, firstly, is to continue to open our markets, trade liberalization and trade facilitation strategies, to expand our bilateral, regional, and multilateral network. So we are now actively participating in negotiating FTAs with different countries. These agreements aim to reduce tariff and non-tariff barriers so that we can expand the market access for Philippine goods and services. So in ASEAN, we are very much involved in the upgrade of the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, as well as in the ASEAN Plus One free trade agreements. Recently, we have concluded negotiations on ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA. There's also ongoing negotiations on ASEAN, China, as well as negotiations on the ASEAN India free trade agreement. So that's on the regional side. We're also doing bilaterals. Recently, we launched negotiations with the United Arab Emirates, and we will also be resuming our negotiations with the EU by the end of the year. We're also looking into non-binding agreements, non-FTA agreements, like expanding our joint economic cooperation agreements with a wider set of countries, non-traditional partners. It's part of our de-risking strategy. The president has already said that we need to expand our network of trade partners. Other FTAs that are also being considered are in Latin America as well as in Africa. Those are the other trading partners that we're targeting, as well as in the CPTPP. I think among the ASEAN, Philippines is one of the few countries that has not yet part of the CPTPP. So that's on the free trade aspect. We're also doing export promotion. We have launched the Philippine Export Development Plan last year. We're doing extensive information and advocacy across the country. After we joined our RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, we launched the T campaign, which stands for Trade Education and Advocacy Campaign. So we're doing information sharing in 5 regional clusters covering the major islands of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Other strategies that we're undertaking is to continue to attract investments, and we have launched a green lane so that we can prioritize or at least ease the entry of investments. So since the green lane for strategic investments was launched, we have actually already attracted around 2 trillion pesos worth of strategic investments. Other important policies would be along the lines of improving the business environment. So the Philippines is not a major user of trade remedies. I know trade remedies might be something that is maybe sensitive to some of you, but if you compare the Philippines to the other WTO members, we don't use a lot of trade remedies. But recently, we launched an electronic filing system. This is to help ensure that our domestic industries remain competitive, that they are also not injured by the entry of imported goods. So these are some of the strategies that we're doing. Continue to open our economy, promote our exports, and also continue to improve the business environment. Related to this would be also the infrastructure side. I think we need to continue to expand and improve our infrastructure. So there's work also ongoing at the department together with other agencies to continue to attract investments on infrastructure. And related to this is the passage of the PPP, Public-Private Partnership, which will help address the choke points in investments in big ticket projects. So these are just some of the policies and projects that we're doing at the department to help empower businesses, especially for them to be able to maximize the use of free trade agreements and open trade.
Well, thank you, Lynn. To Ms. Yogi, well, Indonesia sets a really great example of now attracting FDI by leveraging the critical minerals, nickel especially, and has a set of ambitious strategy to establish the manufacturing hub for the clean energy technologies. Now, so how has the Indonesian government advanced this agenda amid this fragmented global landscape, and what lessons can you share?
Thank you, Jin Young. And so, yeah, thank you, ADB, also for inviting me in this very important discussion. And afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, for that question, I must go back a little bit, probably like a little bit far to, yeah, our constitution. I think Indonesian constitution, yeah, since our independence in 1945, mandated actually the use of the land and water. So it means the land and sea and whatever underneath is for the best interest of the people of Indonesia. So actually that's the idea that for so many years we've been trying to push toward this agenda of increasing the value added of our natural resources. I mean, Indonesia is very rich in natural resources, but really the challenge remains, like how can we increase the value that from the natural resource that we have. So only after like more than 70 years, 75 years actually of from our independence, and now we are seeing some evidence in like more development of smelters and more than it's ever been before. So I think in actually it's working now, hopefully. And so it's also saying that it's not a really new ambition. It's been there. Only maybe that now we're catching up with and seeing some result because of some very strong determination, yeah, from the president and the whole cabinet and the government. So, and then about the fragmented landscape that we are all facing. So I think it gives even more reason to really build our own capacity to go farther into the downstream. And for Indonesian case, there are still much more to be done and much more that can be done, I think, in terms of this industrialization policy. And not only talking about how can we increase the value of our export, but also to cater our own domestic demand. I mean, we cannot really rely all the time from the import if we want to even respond to our own domestic demand, because we have such a huge market in Indonesia. So really, the ambition is to for Indonesia to be able to play a more significant role in and substantial role in the global value chain that also aligns with the future, where we are going in the future. I mean, as a global as the world actually, and what we've been seeing is for example in the climate change, this is the problem for everyone, and we have to act together. For example, that the Indonesian strategy is how we can really utilize the opportunity with the climate agenda, and also combine that with our economic transformation strategy. So really, we want to combine those two, and especially for critical minerals. So it has been geared toward the direction where we can contribute and play a more important role in energy transition. For example, playing part in the global supply chain for batteries for electric vehicle, and also with other renewable energy equipments. And evidently this has some results. So for example, from the data, the nickel product export before 2020 was only 1.1 billion, and then in 2022 it soared to 29 billion. So it's quite a huge shift, yeah. And also overall growth of the base metal industry also increased from 2.8% only to 14.2%. So yeah, this all shows how big it is, you know, if you play a bigger role in also manufacture your own natural resource. And this strategy or this policy of industrialization will also be extended to other commodities beyond critical minerals. And also for critical minerals, we would like also to go further into the downstream direction. And so lastly, for the lesson, so I think determination and also have a clear focus or objectives. And also it's really important to have diversification of products and markets, and also to combine both the demand from export but also the demand from your domestic market. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogi. Well, you know, Indonesia now actually produces more than half of the world supplies for nickel. So it's a really drastic kind of improvement somehow. Now, may I invite Carlos? So Carlos, APEC has been very active in getting like you know the harmonized taxonomy for environmental goods and services, and you now seem to have a you know list of these environmental goods and services. What could be the impact of this geopolitical fragmentation for trade in terms of these you know ESG, and how can regulatory policies to reduce such barriers?
Good afternoon, Sanjong. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you. Well, thank you so much for the kind invitation to participate in this event. And I'm very sorry I couldn't be in Manila in person. I got sick on Sunday, and unfortunately, I was not fit to travel yesterday. Well, as for your question, I think we are getting several repercussions, as this could affect the global value chain of those products, those environmental goods. Many of these environmental goods need hundreds or thousands of different parts and components. So their value chain, their production process is quite complex. And so, for example, if we would like to produce a wind turbine to generate renewable energy, we need around 8,000 different parts and components from all over the world. So if, let's say, just one of these components is affected by higher import tariffs or export restrictions or trade remedies, among other trade restrictive measures, so the whole production is going to be affected. So in the context of this geoeconomic fragmentation, we are also noting more the use of measures like local content requirements that could increase production costs, and also the use of subsidies that could distort a competition and also could motivate others to implement similar measures to distort the market or other measures to restrict trade. So we are noticing that producers are diversifying nowadays their sources uh, of part of in components from all at the expense of a higher cost. So they are moving from a just-in-time model where they could source these parts and components from the most convenient place from all over the world to a just-in-case model where they are basically building redundancies, and this I mean, is more expensive, certainly. So, and finally, about framing regulatory policies, I would say that many of these trade barriers that we see are implemented aiming a policy objective that actually they can be achieved in less distorting trade manners. For example, instead of implementing export subsidies to improve export performance and diversify exports. So what governments can do is to promote competitiveness via macroeconomic stability, economic openness, development on infrastructure and human capital. Also, if let's say we have economies that would like to implement export restrictions to secure the provision of any product in the local market and at lower prices, instead, I would say is less distorting to reduce tariff rates, to secure the provision of those components. Similarly, if let's say some governments are trying to implement local content requirements as a means to create new jobs, develop and protect local producers, this actually is resulting in inefficient allocation of resources and also is impacting negatively on trade. Instead, the same objectives could be achieved by creating a more business-friendly environment to create jobs and stimulate investments. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlo. Sorry that you couldn't make it here in person. Next time, yeah? So, Anita, I know you studied trade and international relations. It's a very complicated world against the backdrop of fragmented world trade. There are a lot of now plurilateral approaches, new initiatives coming up. Like, I stopped counting. There were so many. So in G20, G7, thanks to digitalization, critical mineral supply chain. So can you maybe give us maybe summary? I don't know if there can be a summary. And what are the implications of these sprucing new initiatives?
Thank you, Sin Young. And also, thank you, Rolando. Thank you, Albert, for having us here in Manila. Very interesting times for discussing trade fragmentation and supply chains. We are indeed at a cusp, and perhaps that is why it's a good time to also stocktake what is it that governments are discussing in the intergovernmental economic platforms. So G20 and G7 specifically, which you mentioned, G20 clearly is a more diversified group than G7 is. G7 has a more focused agenda. They don't have to accommodate far too many dissensions within their communiques and discussions in their working groups. G20, I was very fortunate this year, last 2 years, to be part of the Trade and Investment Working Group. Especially in 2023, we actually wrote the issue note for discussions in the, and GVC was up for discussions in that. The presidency's ambition were actually quite high in terms of mapping the GVCs and creating some kind of early warning systems. But eventually that got diluted to a level where high principles, the Jaipur high principles were adopted. Now, there is often this critique of G20 trade communiques is that they are more or less copy-paste of what G7 decides by the time the trade ministers meet in the month of June/July. The G20 clearly has to accommodate a more diversified group of economies. So all they could manage this year, but make no mistake, clearly addressing the dependencies and the fault lines that became very clear during the COVID-19 pandemic. The G20 and G7 have a history, Sin Young, they have discussed China's centrality in the supply chains for quite some time, but prior to COVID, it was mostly addressed around subsidies, capacities, and distribution of capacity in the exports of China. But during the COVID and post-COVID, the focus has actually come back to addressing the supply chains in a deconstructed manner, where the efficiencies which businesses seek, say most of the time, all the time, those efficiencies are being tested against the parameters of trust, dependency, reliability, security, diversified is yet. So the Jaipur principles are more analytical in nature, that is to say, help governments in establishing the certainty in supply chains, the resilience in supply chains through analysis of data, cooperation, collaboration, etc. The G7 is a little more aggressive on this by implying issues of trust. Therefore, trustworthy supply chains then is the word that is used in the leaders. And of course, security and sustainability also figure quite high. Transparency, that is, and finally, the inclusive word. And it's very interesting that both G20 and G7 are now taking the inclusive principle very seriously. The Global South was announced as a focus of supply chains in the G20, and G7 does not use the word developing very often, rarely if ever in its communiques, but it's incredible that in the Osaka Sakai trade ministers communique, even the Hiroshima communique mentions the word bringing the developing economies into this new supply chains, the diversified supply chains. And the critical mineral supply chains are very much a part of this, which is why some of the initiatives such as IMEC in G20, the PGII in G7, these initiatives therefore become, very prominent and worth taking seriously in the very near future, not very far future, to say the least. And it is quite obvious when we discuss the critical mineral supply chain, or even the diversification of supply chain, is that with the trust element being implicit, is that the partnerships, the strategic partnerships, which are not necessarily discussed in the G20 and G7. So something like the India-US strategic partnership, India-ASEAN strategic partnership, ASEAN-Japan strategic partnerships, then these become very important mechanisms and in some manner fulfilling the principles being discussed in the G20 and G7. I'll stop now, but I'll be very happy to explain more as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Anika. India is becoming really a big next regional player. Liu Chin again. So Malaysia is hosting the next ASEAN meetings. Congratulations. So Malaysia has been, major regions leader for a long time. It's like in ASEAN anyway. What are the policy priorities? What are the sort of agenda for the Malaysian government to push for ASEAN?
Sin Yong, if you don't mind, I take you back to a larger questions before I come to what you have asked me. As I mentioned this morning, over the last 50 years, Asia and now particularly China has actually seen the United States and Europe as the consumer of the last resort and the importer of the last resort. And therefore, the export-oriented economy or the export-oriented strategy has always had in mind the United States and Europe as the final destination for their exports. But we are coming to a situation where the United States middle class has either shrunk or has not actually expanded, whereas productive capacity in Asia, particularly in China, has grown tremendously. And with the help of AI, with the help of Industrial 4.0, with the technological acquisition in China and many parts of Asia, the productive capacity has become so huge. So how do we square the circle? I think that is a larger, huge question that we'll have to deal with. You mentioned about a lot of what they call diversion of trade, and this morning there were a lot of discussions about diversion of trade, some of which actually are investment from Chinese companies in Mexico, in different parts of Southeast Asia. I was in Shenzhen in April. I was supposed to meet 15 investors, and it turned out 70 companies came. And these are all listed companies in China. And I had to tell them that, there is a term in China called taking shower. Taking shower actually means rebadging or repackaging, or what they call circumvention. So I have to tell them that you please don't see Malaysia as a place that you can do circumvention or diversion or repackaging or rebadging, because eventually you will be caught. But the fundamental problem here, I think, is that the United States has lost its middle class, and China has this huge productive capacity, but its middle class is now struggling. So how do we square the circle is something that I am concerned and I'm very worried about. But anyway, to come back to your questions, I think ASEAN, next year we are going to sign on to the ASEAN Vision 2045. Next year we are going to deal with multiple challenges. Increasingly, we all realize that the middle ground is so important. The middle ground is so important because in a world that is almost, at least there are actors who want to bifurcate, and bifurcation may benefit different groups of countries. ASEAN, countries like Brazil, Latin America, some countries in Africa, all these countries will become very important. Those who are in the middle will play a very important role. And we recognize that ASEAN has that organizational credential to play a very important role to cement the space, the middle, the buffer, so that trade doesn't bifurcate. Within ASEAN, you mentioned about my idea of racing to the top. I think we will have to start a conversation so that we do not race to the bottom. For the longest of time, countries are told to compete on reducing costs. Reducing costs very often reduces wages at the expense of workers. Very often we compete to offer tax incentive to investor, and therefore hurting the collections of taxes. And we may have to start thinking of how to ensure that we don't race to the bottom on taxes, we don't race to the bottom on workers' pay as well as workers' welfare, because that will hurt the creation of a middle class society in our respective society. And we also have to work with each other so that we do not race to the bottom as far as environmental standard and climate, our climate situation among our countries. So having a different terms of reference, a different conversation, looking at racing to the top and not racing to the bottom is something that we hope to achieve. Not easy, but we hope that in some way, hopefully, we can somehow change the conversation and push a different type of conversation in next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, very insightful. I can't agree more. Next to Lynn, there are many regional initiatives, APEC, ASEAN, RCEP. All these are now, creating, I think, it's not only just opportunities, but also challenges. So in this context of increasing geoeconomic fragmentation, how can they help set the trade priorities for the Philippines?
Okay, so APEC, ASEAN, and RCEP they do play a pivotal role in bolstering the trade priorities of the Philippines. So APEC, ASEAN, they share common principles, also RCEP in many ways. So these regional initiatives basically are focused on regional economic integration, reducing trade barriers, and also promoting economic cooperation. So we like this. It supports our trade priorities. There are very important avenues as well for promoting market access for Philippine products, also in enhancing our competitiveness, especially as we learn from the best practices of the different partners and members. And also, there are principles in APEC, ASEAN, and RCEP that support sustainable economic growth. So Carlos mentioned the APEC environmental goods and services work. That is important for us because we're also a priority now of the Philippines is sustainable economic development. And then ASEAN also has work on circular economy. And also, I think maybe RCEP, I'm not very sure if they have some work on sustainable trade, but these are common themes that are being discussed in some of our meetings. The other thing is also the principle of rules-based trading system. All of these initiatives uphold the rules-based international trading system as essential pillars of a resilient global economy. And this is important that countries adhere to the rule of law. APEC, ASEAN, and RCEP also represent very important trading partners of the Philippines from around 60% to 80%. There are source of imports and also our export market. So we will continue to expand and work closely with all the partners there to avoid dependencies on a particular market. We will do it bilaterally, we will do it regionally, and also to help us manage the risk. So we will continue to engage as well with the emerging economies in these regional initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. To Ms. Yogi. Well, Indonesia really is, one of the largest ASEAN economies, and then being a strong leader. But it also actively engage outside the region. More recently, also discussing the accession process for the OECD. Now, how can Indonesia really play a role in bridging the regional and global agenda? Do you see the kind of vision of the Indonesia government?
Okay, thank you, Jin Yong. Yeah, as I think we obviously we can see Indonesia has been playing a very important role in ASEAN, and also at the same time in the bigger or larger international arena. In G20, for example, Indonesia is the only ASEAN countries in G20. So how can we sort of make this to role reinforces each other, not really conflicting, yeah. But I think we've tried and somehow we succeeded. So for example, like Indonesia can like be the voice of ASEAN for this international arena. For example, with ASEAN taxonomy, for example, yeah. So it's the we can say that it's the only taxonomy which actually feature the classification for energy transition. So for ASEAN context, it's really important because there are many countries which are fossil fuel producers, and really the idea is how can we also answer to this problem that we are facing, you know, as a fossil fuel producer, for example. So this kind of thing and what we've been doing in ASEAN and Indonesia can bring it to the international or multilateral forums such as G20. And then now recently with OECD, I think it's a little bit different direction. So, I mean, OECD is more like for Indonesia's own aspiration, yeah, to become advanced economies in the future. So, so I think the idea is to really push us ourselves harder. So instead of course, we've been trying also on our own effort to do all the necessary reforms, structural reform, institutional reforms. But I think to commit to something, this public and international agenda, I think will help Indonesia to push ourselves even harder and meet the requirement. And but also maybe there are some trade-offs, could be trade-offs, but hopefully this will be more short-term. So there might be like consequences that we have to meet or increase our fulfillment for the procurement procedure, for example, and maybe in short term it will reduce our privilege or yeah, but I think in the long term this will push ourselves toward better and more yeah, higher standard and will propel ourselves for higher development, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Yogi. Just brings me back the memory. Korea joined OECD, and a few years later we had a crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But then
get ready.
Yes. Hopefully we, yeah. And it's a long process to go. And I heard that I think Thailand also recently announces their commitment. So we have partners to fight for, yeah.
Sure. Carlos, we didn't forget about you. So, well, even in the APAC arena, in fact, in the meetings, I have seen increasingly the diverging views and also political division in the meeting room. What are the most challenging areas for cooperation among APEC member economies in this current context of geo-economic fragmentation? In your view, how can APEC manage better in this area?
Thanks, Anjong. A very challenging question. In APEC, actually, all decisions are made by consensus. So to reach a decision, I mean, it could take a while. And certainly right now, I would say that any topic that is related to trade liberalization, particularly in terms of trading goods, I mean, are very challenging. Discussions, for example, on reducing tariffs, on agreeing in a new list of environmental goods. It it's taking time. There's no common ground yet. Also, discussions on this long-term aspirational goal of the free trade area of the Asia Pacific are also having some difficulties to find common ground. Uh, Another area where APEC members are having different views is about digital trade. I mean, digital economy matters. So, for example, issues related to cross-border data flows, data privacy, among others. So we are noticing, for example, that there's an increase of measures affecting the cross-border data flows, like, for example, requirements on data storage, data processing, data distribution, among others. And well, to make better progress, so what can APEC do. So I would say within APEC, so I think it's important to put in practice what we call pathfinder approaches, in which APEC economies can implement initiatives at their own pace and only when they are ready. So we don't need the 21 economies to be on the same page. So we start with those that are ready. And that could be something that could probably be done to make better progress. Also, I would say APEC economies can implement, I mean, binding arrangements outside APEC at the bilateral or sub-regional or regional level with those uh, counterparts that are on the same page on a number of topics. So those are, I think, some of the ways. Of course, it's also important that APEC economies continue using APEC as a fora to to strengthen the communication channels and then find ways, I mean, to resolve the issues that they may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Well, Anita, well, you've been well regarded as an expert of Indo-Pacific economic architecture. So can you share your insights and on the Indo-Pacific economic architecture, as well as perhaps the future direction of regions economic integration, drawing from the new Indo-Pacific relation as well as geo-economic fragmentation.
Yes, thank you. So Indo-Pacific architecture is mostly being discussed around the emergence of new cooperation linkages and the supply chains. Now, it may be interesting to note here that till such time the Indo-Pacific term was limited to strategic and defense matters and the strategic interests in the East and South China Sea. Till that time, there were very little buyers for this particular architecture in Southeast Asia, in particular ASEAN, and even South Asia, so to speak, was not much of a votary of this term. But the moment the focus was brought to the economic linkages, and which, by the way, is the cornerstone of this particular architecture, the strategic interests are actually important to the extent of desecuritizing the development and linkages process in the region. And Indo-Pacific is not just a continuum of Asia-Pacific as we have known it. Asia-Pacific also has its own definition among different quarters. You have how Asia looks at Asia-Pacific and the Japanese description of Asia-Pacific. What the erstwhile Europe and UK, some of them included India in Asia-Pacific, but then some not. And then finally, there is the Australian version of Asia-Pacific, which is actually Asia and the Pacific, which includes the small island nations in Polynesia and Micronesia and Melanesia. So all that being taken into account, Indo-Pacific economic architecture is ideally a kind of a response mechanism to the changes that have taken place in the post-war Asia-Pacific construct. It is actually a consolidation of the gains made by the Asian tigers, but at the same time, it brings in the aspirational countries in the region, many of which were not even on the map till about 20 years back. It also brings back the focus on the small island developing countries, in particular now that climate change and sustainable development and blue economy are so much a focus in every economic construct. And so the participation, taking the LDCs and the SIDS together is very important. The demographic changes in the region, how are we really prepared to address our demographic, especially the young demography? In Southeast Asia, several countries are still young, others are now approaching the population is aging very fast, and I don't need to re-emphasize here what are the economic benefits and challenges in this demographic changes. South Asia is very young at this time. The mean age in India at it's around 28.8 if I'm not mistaken. So with all these factors, the Indo-Pacific economic architecture is actually a preparation for the economic linkages of the future. And make no mistake, manufacturing is going to be a competitive element in this architecture. Make no mistake on that. However, and the morning two sessions have captured this very, very clearly, is that the digital aspects of economy, services, and more recently, the AI and its usage in the different processes of goods and services sector. Now, those are the issues which really this region should be looking at and preparing itself for. And Indo-Pacific, therefore, this construct is actually a preparation for addressing the participation of the region in the economy of the future. And several other sessions earlier discussed the value chains, participation in trade, the changing profile of the participants, but trade tensions and the changes implicit in the supply chains. But one of the things, two things rather, Claudia captured the importance of the human capital and how these capacities cannot be generated in a very short frame of time, which is an important concern in this architecture. And the other one, of course, being the technology cooperation, the high cost of production and processing of minerals, critical minerals, the environmental cost, despite countries like Australia being very rich in the upstream, whether they are ready to be participant in the downstream also. So therefore, technology cooperation then becomes very important in the forthcoming Indo-Pacific architecture. And that is also what I alluded to very briefly in my previous intervention, that these strategic cooperations then become very important. So from tariffs, we are now moving to technology cooperation. Not enough importance is being given to it in the writings that we see. But very broadly, the new architecture consists of all these new and aspirational elements. But at the bottom lies the same issues of resilient and trustworthy supply chains, and with an addition of addressing the economy of the future.
Thank you. Well, at this point, I would like to invite some of our live and online participants and the floor for any questions. We've heard great the presentations and dialogue from the panelists. I hope that it motivates many participants to raise questions. Any questions? No? Oh, there's a one in the back.
Thank you very much for the very interesting talks. I want to have two questions. The first one is regarding our doom loop of weak domestic demands in the US and China's overcapacities. I wonder if might slightly be negative in the sense that we also see opportunities, especially for Asia, as the center of gravity of demand shift from west to east. So in that case, as a final demand that is growing very quickly in this part of the world, then there's also opportunities, as some of the work around GBC integration have shown, for production closer to the final demand. There's more opportunities to develop downstream segments, especially in areas like marketing or branding. I suppose there could also be opportunities there. And my second question is for our last speaker there on the Indo-Pacific architecture. I find it also interesting that I didn't hear any of the architecture that is China trying to impose to the world through BRI, for example, with the different corridors. I wonder to what extent that some of these corridors might also be integrated within a bigger global integration system, or what are some of the challenges that you might see, for instance, the legacies that it might have now that it just went through its first 10 years? How do you see that's going to play out in the future? Thank you.
Can you identify yourself?
Yes, Tang Nguyen from Oxford Economics.
Okay, thank you. Well, so I'd like to invite Li Qin for the first question. I had similar question actually.
Thank you for the questions. Let me start with China first. I think China is now experiencing a once-in-a-generation adjustment or structural challenge. From the Southern tour of Deng Xiaoping in 1992 up until COVID, there was this optimism over a period of nearly 30 years that tomorrow will be better than today, next year will be better than this year, the next generation will live a better life than this generation. I think that optimism in China has now been questioned by ordinary people, mainly because China was run on 4 engines, and now these engines are not doing well. Number one, export, which is now being stranglehold. Number two, property, which used to contribute to 30% of GDP. It is now in trouble. The third engine of growth is high tech, of which the government doubled down during the 2-session meeting in March. But high tech has a challenge. I went to a factory in Shenzhen in April. The factory made phone, very advanced, very high tech. There were 120 boxes, 120 processors. And they told me 5 years ago, these 120 processors needed 80 people, 80 workers. Now only 14 is required. So high tech takes away jobs. And finally, domestic demand. Domestic demand, because of the first 3 engines creating challenges and also the lack of optimism. Therefore, I think the domestic demand is facing challenge. In the long run, I think the Chinese economy will have to address the questions of services. We'll have to address the questions of care economy. We'll have to deal with the questions of aggregate demand. Likewise, for Southeast Asia, for Latin America, for Africa, if we cannot create a middle-class society in our region in the next 10, 15 years, if we cannot generate enough demand here, aggregate demand here, then we will still fall back to this export-led economy with the US or Europe as the final destination, and that becomes a vicious cycle. So I am optimistic like you, provided that we get our acts together. We get our acts together so that we create demand here. And in order to create demand in Southeast Asia, we will have to create a middle-class society. In order to create a middle-class society here, we will have to race to the top and not race to the bottom.
Thank you. Second question, Anita?
Yes. No. If we bring down the discussions on Indo-Pacific to the level of BRI and IMEC, then we are doing a grave injustice to what this region has achieved in the last 50, 60 years. And the developmental story of this region is not as binary as some interpretation would want us to believe it. Though I must say that the BRI plans, which incidentally are bilateral in nature. They don't have as such a implication which sort of cover a regional behavior for participation in economic activities. So to that extent, I would like to caution that BRI cannot really be explained in terms of a regional initiative, far less a cross-regional initiative as such. So, so I would like to partially disagree with what you said, but I do want to emphasize here that this interpretation of Indo-Pacific architecture is not exclusionary in nature, as mostly we get the interpretation from some quarters of the developed world or even some of the developing world. So in this architecture is not binary in its explanation. What it does explain is that when Asia, developing Asia, EU, whose engagement in Asia is quite deep, but when EU decides that when you focus on Asia, it cannot be China, but whole of Asia per se. And which is why we see EU's expanding investments in ASEAN as such. There was a point of time just after COVID when EU was the second largest investor in ASEAN. And more or less that trend is maintaining with a few fluctuations in between. So with this kind of an engagement from outside Asia, the architecture is more to do with how the economic linkages will be managed in the future, what will be the participation conditions, who are the lesser developed countries who will, what sort of capacities they will need to participate in this architecture. And definitely Indo-Pacific is a pushback to all the hegemonic behavior in terms of supply chains and yeah. So
thank you.
I'll stop here. Yeah?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Can I have a bit more questions from the floor? Anyone? Albert.
Hi. This is very simple questions to the speakers. Could you tell us what's the biggest benefit and cost of China's investments or businesses with respect to your own countries? Thank you.
Yuki?
I'll try. Okay, so the biggest benefit, from this current situation with respect to Indonesia and China, I think, first of all, I want to mention something that I forgot before. For Indonesia, once again, I'm quoting from our constitution. It's for international cooperation. So we hold this principle of neutrality, and the terminology is actually free and active. So it's not only neutral, but it's also we are free to choose to with whomever suitable to cooperate with. So it's always opportunistic and pragmatic. Yeah. So in terms of economic cooperation. So recently we've been seeing more and more cooperation with China, and historically also it's always been a very strong relationship, trade relation between Indonesia and China. And just I think last year is the first year that we experienced surplus, trade surplus with China. So yeah, I think the current change actually has some impacts for Indonesia, and we are. I think we want to expand more in that direction, and yeah. So I think with China. The benefit, I think, because they also offer not only the traditional trade relation, but now they are offering technology, alternative technology, from what the more traditional advanced country technology that is more affordable, maybe for example, for Indonesia to to implement. So I think that's one of the benefits. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Let me attempt to answer the question quickly. In terms of benefits, I agree with Yugi that the technology and particularly green transition, those are what China has, and China can provide at an affordable rate. But at the same time, we are also very conscious and cautious about the potential of the possibility of actually hurting domestic and indigenous industrial capability. I think that is something that we are aware and we are concerned about. Recently, in some of my meetings with my counterparts in many other countries, because Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil, say Turkey, some of these countries are very friendly to China. But when other countries erects a tariff war against China, and with China having slower demand, we are dealing with some of these countries, countries friendly to China. We're dealing with challenges of excess capacity flowing to our way because we do not put up a wall. And I think that is something that we are learning and trying to see how to deal with it.
Thank you. That's a very interesting point. Albert?
Yeah, in my opening comments, I had mentioned that there were issues about how much RCEP has really had a real impact on trade and investment in the region. So I'm just curious, from your standpoint, has RCEP been a disappointment, or has it been very helpful? What is your view about the benefits that have come from RCEP and what could be achieved in the future?
Can I ask also then Lynn and Carlos, but very quickly. We are running out of time now.
For RCEP, the Philippines, we went through a very difficult ratification stage. I think we were the last among the RCEP countries to have joined RCEP. But speaking for the Philippines, RCEP does offer a lot of preferences that are better than our ASEAN trade agreement or better than our ASEAN Plus One agreements and even our bilateral FTAs. So RCEP countries, they have liberalized on goods and services, and I think maybe we're not seeing it now, but in the future, hopefully we will see that more trade in goods and services and also movement of people will happen. But there's still some barriers that continue to exist because there's still a lot of issues. RCEP is not a perfect agreement. Countries have put in their sensitive list. There have also a lot of issues, a lot of topics that need to be further enhanced. So there's a committee in charge of that. There's also a committee on economic and technical cooperation to assist the RCEP countries who need assistance in implementing their commitments. And also there's still a lot of complex implementation processes like on goods and services investment, also intellectual property and e-commerce. So there's still a need to harmonize many, many regulations and measures. So that's still ongoing work in RCEP right now.
Thank you. I don't want to drag on, but I have one question quickly to follow up. How much do you actually see that RCEP is being utilized? I mean, it's still a very new agreement.
For the Philippines, because it's just 1 year for us, so we haven't done, but we do have some exporters already using it. Not as much as China, because I know that China has like more than 1,000 already. Ours is just in the 2 digits right now. Yeah.
Just very briefly, I've seen statistics where the RCEP is mostly utilized by China, Korea, and Japan. Whereas other countries are not using much, partly because they have other free trade agreements, but also because these three countries actually produce industrial goods at a very high value and volume.
Thank you. Yes. Carlos, yes, we didn't forget you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm
You so
giving
much.
you 1 minute.
Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, RCEP is useful in a way that is another tool that companies will have to request preferential treatment. But when talking to some, I mean, reps from the private sector, I noticed that they are utilizing more the ASEAN Plus agreements than the RCEP. And in part, it's because to meet the rule of origin, it's easier to do it with the ASEAN Plus, like ASEAN Plus Japan, ASEAN Plus China, Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN, et cetera, than the RCEP. So these are some of the things that probably could be revised in the future to improve, I mean, the utilization of RCEP. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Yes, I mean, just going back a little bit, like, I also saw that the utilization rate for RCEP, and then in fact, given that, this is really the first trade agreement for binding Korea, Japan, and China, these three countries are using RCEP quite a bit, but for ASEAN, I mean, this actually is it's not new in a way, right? It doesn't really give much more differentiated kind of like preferential treatment vis-a-vis ASEAN plus one. So I was a bit wondering like how much is being actually implemented. I don't see that much being implemented. That actually says we need to do a lot more. It does require like the awareness, also making that the implementation easier, and also for the firms to like increase their capacity, being able to actually utilize. I think that there are a lot of more work to be done. Yes.
Can I add to that, Sin Young? So I mentioned the T campaign, the Trade Education and Advocacy Campaign of the Philippines. So that's one. But the other thing that we are also looking at in the Philippines is the FTA utilization work in ASEAN, firstly, because we have no commitments in our FTAs in ASEAN to exchange FTA utilization data. In our FTAs, there's only one FTA. It's with the EFTA countries that we have this mechanism where we exchange data. So actually, the Philippines has proposed to exchange data. That's one thing that we would want to do. It's important to, one basic measure to determine the effect of an FTA is through the measure of the FTA utilization. So if we're able to do that in ASEAN and also in RCEP, I think it would help a lot in determining where the choke points are, why are we not using it, and so on.
Thank you. Well, this brings to an end of the session. I would like to thank all the panelists, Carlos included, for really active participation and then sharing insightful comments. I would like to also thank all the participants for actively joining the discussion and raising questions. I do hope that these questions are not the end of this discussion. Hope that we discuss further during the break, and dinner I heard is prepared. So thank you very much.